Thank you, Ms. Houchin. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for engaging in this debate. And I do recall being on the House administration with the now chairman and how he was constantly opposed to any federal laws imposing on the states anything with regard to voting rights. So it's wonderful to see the change. Not really great. It's not wonderful because it's really sad what this is about. Can you take out your driver's license? You're in, and Mr. Scott has his out. If you took yours out, I'm looking at mine. Yeah. And what we're talking about here is, does your driver's license tell us where you were born? It does not. Does it?
No, not in the state of Wisconsin.
Mr. Scott, yours doesn't either. Because what we're talking about is registration. And you cannot use this ID to register to vote under your bill. Is that correct, Mr. Stiles?
You could not use your ID. That would be an accurate statement. But you could, for example, if you were in the state of North Dakota. So if somebody here was in this.
But I'm asking, so in
Wisconsin,
many states, you could not use that ID to register to vote. But, Chairman Stiles, do you have a passport?
I personally do have
You
a
do
passport.
have a passport.
I'm part of the roughly 50% of Americans.
You're roughly 50% of Americans have a passport because you travel. About 50% of Americans don't travel internationally. They don't have that money. Is that right? I mean, one of the reasons you have to have a certain amount of money to be able to travel internationally to get that passport, to pay for that passport. Is that correct?
There is a charge to
there is
a
a
U.S.
charge.
passport.
21.3 million American citizens of voting age don't have ready access to citizenship documents. Does that sound about right, Chairman Stiles?
I don't have that data in front of me. Do you have a source of that data you'd like to share?
But if you said 50% don't have ready access to passports, I will.
They're two very different topics, of course.
Yeah, but that's one
form of citizenship verification
that's
in the bill is a passport.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from the Bennett Center entitled 21.3 million American citizens of voting age don't have ready access to citizen documents.
Without objection.
And this is ready access. And we already discussed earlier the fact that this bill, you have changed the enactment date of this bill to go in effect as soon as it is signed into law. If you could get this bill, like your goal would be to get this bill as soon as possible, right? Signed into law.
Yes.
And if that happens, then this 21.3 million American citizens who might not be prepared for a future in a few weeks in terms of Texas, who might want to, they're excited about the race, they're excited about the Republican senators who are running against each other and battling it out, they're excited about the Democrat primaries, they want to get involved, they want to register to vote, and they might be on one of the 21.3 million Americans who don't have ready access to citizenship documents. And that's what we are concerned about, is that by rushing this into law, you are going to prevent so many people from being able to register to vote. And that's, I think, unacceptable. When you say how many illegal, immigrants or too many voting, I'd flip the question and ask you, how many eligible citizens are you worried about being turned away because you are rushing something like this into law? Do you care?
We have specifically considered that there may be individuals that are not in possession of documentary proof of evidence. And on page 12 of the legislative text, we put forward, in conjunction with what will be EAC guidance for applicants who do not provide or have that possession of documentary proof of citizenship, ultimately giving them avenues to be able to attest to their citizenship, which is still significantly stronger than underlying law. And because of the process as set forward in the legislation, I do not think we'll reach the concerns that you've brought forward today.
Yeah, and I think that this is interesting because we already heard from the ranking member that there is already an attestation. So now you're saying, well, it's all right because we're going to allow them to do basically an affidavit, an attestation. That's what is already required, is an attestation. But now you're going to make them attest and then go out and have to spend all that money to get those underlying documents. And I mean, that's a huge concern that I have. The other one is that you have eliminated the ability of people to register to vote, providing documentation, unless they do it in person. I represent a huge rural area. My voters, people who are eligible to vote in my area, might need to travel 5 hours, 4 hours round trip, because we have a lot of space between us. We love those little towns and villages, but that's not where the county clerk's office is. And I have a major problem with the fact that, what are they going to do? Like, who's going to help them pay for that gas? Is there any way to help them pay for that gas? Can they apply for anything to help pay for that gas? What are they going to do in terms of childcare? Working women don't have anyone to leave their kids with, so they can go register to vote during working hours. Because when our county clerk's office is open, Mr. Chairman Steil?
It depends on the jurisdiction.
Generally, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5.
Not during election season in the state of Wisconsin, but that may be the case in New Mexico.
Yeah. But generally, that's when they're open. And I think that that's the problem with this legislation, is it puts all this burden on eligible citizens who are going to be deterred from voting. Ranking member.
I do want to comment on that, because particularly for rural voters, and I hear my good friend Mr. Griffith, who also serves on Committee on House Administration. I've heard him say several occasions talking about the needs of rural voters. So think about this: 80 million rural Americans, many of whom register to vote online or via mail currently, have to travel significant distances now under this bill. And by the way, its registration is largely, for all the talk about voter ID, I haven't said a word about voter ID during this whole conversation. It's about registering, the difficulty in registering. They did narrow the number of things that states currently allow for voter ID, make it harder and harder. That is an actual fact of this. Student ID is no longer. But now you're going to have to drive. And just to, for instance, Inyo County, California, some voters would have to travel 378 miles round trip to their designated election office in order to register. 7 hours of driving. I don't know, does that sound like a burden to anybody? 7 hours in the car to register to vote? SAVE Act would force voters in Mojave County, Arizona, to drive over 500 miles, crossing state lines several times in order to get to designated election offices. That doesn't seem extreme to anybody? You're going to turn over your data to the Department of Homeland Services and Christine Nome. You're going to have to drive, in some cases, particularly rural voters, hundreds of miles, hours and hours in the car. And by the way, God forbid you get to the election office after traveling 3.5 miles with another 3.5 mile trip to go home, and you forgot something that was one of your documentary proofs of documentation. God forbid, because that means you can't exercise your God-given inalienable right to vote as an American citizen. That's like, this is the party of small government. This is the party of rural voters. This is the party of participation. Really? I just mentioned all this. It is, to me, everybody glosses over that and wants to talk about voter ID. I haven't said a word about that. But think of these barriers. Think about, and then giving Homeland Security access to private voter information. Boy, that should be enough to just get everyone to have real concerns about this bill, which was not marked up in committee.
Right, and the whole issue, because this bill doesn't sit here in a vacuum. This bill sits here with the statement that you made. Because what Trump asked for is Republicans to nationalize our federal elections. Trump asked and suggested that ICE officers, masked ICE officers with guns who've already killed citizens, are going to show up at our polling places. People are terrified. People are terrified of this. And it is called voter suppression because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And the reason that people are worried about our election integrity is not because there's been widespread fraud, because as my colleague said, fraud gets prosecuted. It gets prosecuted. And interestingly enough, it tends to be more Republican than Democrat from some of the cases that we've seen. But they're worried because your president, your party, has spent a long time denying elections and saying that he won places he did not, asking to find votes. This fits within a moment of time where there is an attack on elections and on election integrity. And you know, the thing is that Republicans keep lying to the American people, right? They keep telling us that somebody who was holding a phone was going to massacre ICE officers, even when we saw it with our own eyes. And then they want to blame immigrants. And we've already said immigrant voting is statistically meaningless, but what they are afraid of is the people who are going to vote. Republicans are afraid of the women vote. They're afraid of the people of color, of working families, and even given the tariffs that are beating people up and that Republicans are going to vote for, or maybe not in the rule, they're going to vote for tariffs. When Republicans vote for that rule tonight, they're voting for tariffs, and Americans don't like it. And instead of Republicans changing their policies, they're going to change the rules of who gets to register to vote and how expensive is it and how difficult is it. And that's different than using this ID to go and vote. This is about registering to vote. And I think that that really is the key thing. Representative Ranking Member Morale, I am the last Democrat on here, so I want to give you a chance. Is there anything that you've heard that you want to clarify?
Well, I thank you, and I appreciate the debate here, and which I'm sure will rage on. But this is ultimately making it extraordinarily difficult for millions of Americans to vote. You know, in some cases, you'd have to take a plane in Alaska just to register to vote because there's no other way to get to your polling place. 15 million rural Americans would have to travel to register an average of 259 miles to register to vote. 4 hours and 30 minutes. I don't know about anybody else, but that seems to me to be an extraordinary burden to be able to avail yourself of your right to participate at the ballot. So we're going to continue to highlight this and urge in the strongest terms that members reject this.
Thank you very much. And with that, Madam Chair, I would just like to point out that I have a chart here that's not dated. Otherwise, I would enter it into the record. Because it shows that in state after state after state, when there is that red line, it's because we are imposing more restrictive requirements on the states for registering and voting. And that's what they are. Is they're just making it harder. They're making it more expensive. They're going to charge you more for your right to vote. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I thank the Chairwoman. Lots been covered, and I appreciate it. Chairman Steil, I just want to thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you for your work on the mega bill, which I know there's other provisions we want to